Kia ora, team. I'm going to be reading from Violence 101 for you guys. Usually, I would want to have the novel on the screen so that you can read along while I'm reading, but unfortunately, my digital copy of the book is really bad. So, I'm going to be reading from my novel, and I do encourage you to grab your novel and read along with me. I've also got some slides open, and these are going to serve as novel study notes. This is something that you should really get into the habit of, especially for NCEA next year, is just getting into making some really good notes while you're reading. Now, keep in mind also while you're reading, you already have chosen a topic for your literature essay. Um, and so, going back to these earlier chapters, this is an opportunity for you to look for evidence for your literature essay. So, think about your topic and keep that in mind while you're reading. And I'm also going to highlight aspects that lead to those topics while I'm reading. But anyway, so I've got Violence 101 in front of me. We are at part 1, Arrival, chapter 1 on page 7. The management staff of Manukau New Horizons Boys' Home waited in a cramped office and fidgeted. There were 4 of them, with an empty chair waiting for a 5th. Helen Grenville looked at her watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. 8:15 and Terry was late again. If Helen didn't start the weekly meeting very soon, the others would drift off, and Monday was such a busy day. She cleared her throat again to begin, and in he breezed. Sorry all, not holding you up, am I? Terry slid into his chair and dragged his papers out of a battered leather satchel. No more than you do every Monday, Terry, Helen replied tightly. And there's just so much to do today. Mea culpa, humble apologies, etc., etc. Come on, let's not dilly-dally. What's up, Helen? She suppressed the reply he deserved and started the meeting. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who were on time. You may be aware by now that we had somewhat of an emergency on Friday afternoon in the carving class. Helen looked pointedly at Toko Wihongi, a leanly muscled ex-army sergeant who wore a mask of indifference. It seems that Charlie Harris, the new carving tutor contracted by Toko, objected to being called a fat N-word by Raymond Mahi and thought near strangulation might bring the boy to his senses. Multiple voices cut in at once, but Helen continued loudly, at which point Junior Thompson and several others began throwing chisels around the workshop, one of which bounced off a wall and almost severed Alex Mason's ear. End result, Alex has 6 stitches in his left ear. Raymond has severe bruising of the larynx, and Charlie Harris is in breach of his contract. Terry jumped in before the others. And now you want us to abandon the carving classes, right? Well, for goodness sake, we put 10 boys in there, all with histories of violence, and arm them with lethal weapons. Is that a wise thing to do, Terry? Oh, come on, Helen. The boys love carving, and for once we're teaching them some genuinely useful skills. These things just happen sometimes, and what happened, cut in Toko, was that Charlie was put into the class unsupervised. The policy is very clear for all tutors. No tutor, especially a new one, is to take any sort of practical class without at least one experienced supervisor. Just because Charlie is large and Maori doesn't mean he can wave a magic wand with those kids. You all know that. We stuffed up, not Charlie. We were in breach of the tutor's contract, not Charlie. I'll speak to him again, but we just have to make sure that he has assistance at all times. In fact, I'll stay with him myself this week. Helen sighed and brushed her hand through her short grey hair. Thank you, Toko. You're right, of course. It's just so... Anyway, we need to move on. Item number 2 on the agenda is a new placement, Hamish Graham, a 14-year-old from Wellington. And yes, I am aware that we are at overflow, but Warburton can no longer deal with him, and Rongo Moana flatly refuses to take him. That leaves good old us. Anyway, here are his profile sheets. I'll shut up while you read. She sat back and watched her staff as they skim-read the profile. The first to speak was Sarah Quinn, a bubbly young therapist from Wellington. Hey, this is the boy who drowned that old Iraqi chap in Miramar a couple of years ago, remember? The papers and TV were full of it. Lots of stories about him being some sort of cold-blooded killer. Wow, so we have him now, eh? Yes, it seems we do, Helen replied. By all accounts, he's extremely intelligent, IQ through the roof. We should put him on correspondence immediately. Before he went to Warburton, he attended high school for a term, where he was in year 9. Warburton suggests we put him on NCEA Level 3 History and Classical Studies. You'll see that he's also very good at maths and physics. Right, well, he starts on Wednesday, and I suppose we'll find out a lot more about him then. Item 3 is, it's quite funny how she's very clearly trying to speed through this and trying to speed through getting the staff on board to having Hamish Graham here. Immediately, these are obviously the first few paragraphs that we have about Hamish Graham, and we learn a lot of very important information about him, and a lot of it is quite important information because over the next few chapters, we're going to be seeing a lot of these things again, but from a slightly different perspective or with a bit more depth. So, the first thing that we've learnt about Hamish Graham so far is that he's 14 years old and 5 months. We haven't actually heard that yet. Sorry, that's in a little while. Getting ahead of myself there. But before that, what we've learned is that he killed an old Iraqi man. Now, the fact that they specifically mention the man's race leads us to believe that they feel that it is a racially motivated murder, or they feel that the fact that the man is Iraqi has something to do with the killing. And so that's supposed to already make the reader wonder if this kid is racist. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as well, because the author has deliberately chosen to mention that it's an Iraqi man. So they deliberately want you to already be thinking something. And it's likely that the author is trying to bias us heavily against Hamish. The author is trying to make us feel that Hamish is a degenerate, a really bad person. So we've got, he killed an old Iraqi man. He's highly intelligent. He was doing level 3 work in year 9. So that's like doing year 13 work in year 9. And yes, we've got highly intelligent and we've got the murder. And they've specifically called him a cold-blooded murderer, which, considering we've got a 14-year-old, all of this is quite damning for poor Hamish. So we've got those that information on page 9. If you are wanting to give some background information on the character, this is a really good place to start. If you're wanting to write about character growth or change or development, this is a good place to start. Okay, I'm still at the bottom of page 9, and I'm about to turn over to page 10, and I'm beginning to read again. Helen, asked Simon Whittle, the Dower's second in command. This profile leaves out some important details, don't you think? I mean, just why is young Master Graham no longer welcome at Warburton? Why won't Rungamoana take him? And why the unholy haste to move him here? What exactly has he done? Helen had expected these questions and replied to them in a neutral monotone. It seems he victimized several of the staff, culminating in him trying to gouge out the eyes of one of his therapists, Millie Polakovic. Some of you may know her. She had apparently laughed at him during a therapy session, something about him trying to sexually harass her. Millie suffered serious damage to the cornea of her right eye and moderate damage to her left. Oh, and he broke her nose. So there you have it. He arrives Wednesday afternoon at 3. Simon, you are more than welcome to join me in the initial interview. And by the way, Terry, he's on your caseload. Okay, so we've got more information on him. We've got the sexual harassment and physical assault of Counselor Millie Polakovic. And I'm going to write the counselor's name there as well, because again, they do refer back to this episode a few times. And when they refer back to it, they just refer to Millie. And I remember some people were saying that they were getting confused about who Millie was. So she was the person who he gouged the eyes out of. Okay, so now on page 10, we switch to the journal entry. I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of this novel, and I think that it really does add to the effectiveness of the novel. If you remember, when we talk about effectiveness, we're talking about whether or not the author is able to achieve his purpose or her purpose in the writing, in the way that the writing is done. And here the author has given multiple perspectives really well by switching between the third person narrative, where he focuses largely on the conversations between the counselors at the center, to the first person narrative from the perspective of Hamish. And I don't particularly know how reliable Hamish is as a first person source as well. If you are reading this, think about it in your mind. Do you feel like Hamish is being truthful a lot of the time? He'll mention the same event at different points in the novel and his journal entries, and the way he presents these events changes a bit every time. So, yes, we're getting the first person perspective, but is that really giving us a good insight into the events from his perspective, or are we just being manipulated by our psychopathic main character? It's just an interesting thing to think about. Again, if that's one of your topics where you're looking at whether or not he's a psychopath or a sociopath, um, this would be a good thing to consider, is just the switch to the first person perspective and the fact that he keeps changing his information through the novel. Anyway, I'm on page 10 and I'm starting at journal entry 1, May 10th. I am 14 years and 5 months old. My name is Hamish Graham, and this is the journal I have to write. Doesn't worry me because I'm a good writer and I'd rather write than talk any day, although I like talking to Terry. The people who run this place don't know what to make of me, just like the last place I was in. I hope these people are better than the retards running Warboats, and what a bunch of morons. If I want to talk, I'll talk, and if I don't, I won't. Mostly I don't. Writing this journal is Mrs. Grenville's genius, yeah, right, way of starting my rehabilitation. She's even given me my own laptop. She said my audience is whoever I want it to be. I pretended I didn't want to, but I like writing. It's easy, and everyone says I'm good at it. The work, joke, in these boys' homes is too simple for me. So once again, I'll be the only boy here doing proper lessons through the correspondence school. I suppose I'll be an historian, a philosopher, or maybe a physicist when I'm older. So here is my journal to whoever wants to read it. I'm actually going to take note of this because one of your topics has to do with whether or not Hamish could likely make better choices one day and one day be rehabilitated. I had missed this idea a bit earlier, but now that I'm reading it, it's jumped out to me because he says, and this is according to Hamish, I suppose I'll be an historian, a philosopher, or maybe a physicist when I'm older. And this is on page 11. And why I think that's significant is because he does not believe that he is going to be a criminal when he grows up. Quite often, when you speak to teenagers who've done criminal things, they don't think that there's any turning back. But he genuinely believes in his own rehabilitation. So Hamish himself believes that he's going to change for the better one day and that he's going to turn his life around and make better choices one day. So that's just something where if you're writing on topic one and this sounds convincing to you, then go for it. So already is not on planning planning on continuing to be a criminal in future. Because believe it or not, guys, quite often it's your choices that do make a huge impact on your future. You do need to choose to be rehabilitated before you can be rehabilitated. A criminal can't stop being a criminal unless they genuinely believe that they can be something else. And I feel like this is good evidence that he is there in his mind. So here is my journal to whoever wants to read it. So I am on page 11 and I am on the second paragraph. Most of the other boys in this place are thick as pictured losers from crap families. They should be easy meat for the legions of therapists and social workers who try to fix us broken down kids. Legion is a good word from Terry, originally meaning a body of between 3,000 to 6,000 Roman soldiers. Most of the loser kids here are easy to fix. I don't know why everyone reckons it's so hard. Most people are too soft on them. They need a good feed, strict discipline, heaps of exercise, and heaps of attention. A year in the army would sort most of them out. The main thing is they need to be taken away from their crap loser families. Families are way overrated. It really bugs me that almost all the out of it kids I come across in these boys' homes are eventually returned to their loser families when we all know that they are the cause of their problems in the first place. In my first term of high school, a science teacher didn't know how to deal with me in the classroom, where it was fairly obvious to her and the other students that I should have been teaching the class, not her. I would have kept better discipline for a start. To shut me up, she had the idea of letting me do my own science research project. I said I would do a project on some aspect of population control. All good so far, but the shit really hit the fan when I presented it to her in the class. She had the cheek to psych at me big time for writing a perfectly sensible project about introducing a license to breed scheme. My carefully researched proposal was that contraceptives should be put into New Zealand's water supply and that people who wanted to have a baby would have to apply to the Central Breeding Authority, or CBA, to see if they were suitable to raise kids. If suitable, they would be given a birthing pill, which would temporarily neutralize the effect of the contraceptives in the water. In my project, I included some possible test questions to ensure parents had a reasonable level of intelligence. The teacher said I was a racist because including questions on calculus and physics in such a test would mean very few Polynesian or Maori babies would be born. What the hell? She was the racist, not me. I never mentioned anything about race. I patiently tried to explain to her and the class a little about the science of eugenics and about how it got bad press because of the Nazis, who, like most people, misunderstood the beauty of the system. It is not for creating some sort of master race. The idea is to make child rearing a serious social responsibility and not an automatic right. Good eugenics creates a reasonable amount of cultures and socio-economic levels while ensuring that those who are unsuitable to breed don't, and that unwanted congenital illnesses are eventually bred out of a population base. Think of how many social problems we would solve by not letting losers breed more losers. Seems every time you look at the news or read a paper, you see hordes of losers staring at you with the same defeated expressions. Sometimes they put on a bit of a show for the cameras and give a gang salute or something equally moronic, but it doesn't hide the fact that mostly they're just sad, dumb losers. I told the teacher that in my scheme she would have failed the breeding test and that she must have found her teaching certificate in a Weet-Bix packet. I think I was sent out of class then. What an overreaction. So anyway, we seem to be stuck with all these loser kids. I think we should have these special schools for bad kids in hardcore places like Waiora and Central Otago. They'd do school subjects from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then in the afternoon do things like compulsory mountain climbing and river crossing while wearing huge packs. The kids who refused to participate would get fed bread and water until they changed their minds. I would divide them into various teams and have mock wars. Military history would be a compulsory subject. I will also make the study of violence compulsory. Seems to me all good things come from violence in one way or another. And so now we're on to the actual quote for topic 2 in the writing. So I'm just going to quickly start a note for that as well, because on page 13, we've got that quote that I've used for you when discussing topic 2 for essay. Topic, all good things come from violence in one way or another. And that is page 13. Okay, so if you're writing about topic 2, it's a really good idea to go to this point and look at what Hamish actually says about violence, because you can't really convince your reader that you agree or disagree with Hamish if you never mention what Hamish himself says or argues. So, I'm down at that last paragraph on page 13. Seems to me all good things come from violence in one way or another. Do you know why the ancient Greek and Roman cultures had the time and leisure to sit around thinking up all sorts of clever philosophical ideas and inventing all sorts of neat stuff like flush toilets and aqueducts? So he's saying that aqueducts, flush toilets, philosophy, the Greeks and Romans came up with these ideas because of violence. Okay? Through violence. That's how. I'm on to page 14 now. Those so-called cultured societies needed huge armies to keep invaders at bay and to capture slaves and resources from other places. Slaves did the hard work, and most of them were treated like crap. I bet you didn't know that the ancient Romans had a subterranean aqueduct system about 400 kilometers long. Thousands of laborers, most of whom were slaves, worked under the direction of the curator aquarum to keep it maintained. They were so well made that Rome still uses a lot of them today. The threat of massive violence allowed those societies to do other neat stuff, like design hardcore buildings and compose music and write plays. Okay, so we've also got design buildings, write plays. Heaps of great inventions in more modern times came about because of war as well. Things like barbed wire, bulldozers, and four-wheel drive vehicles were first used in war. And look how beneficial those three inventions have been to the farming industry in this country. In fact, I don't know why so many people are scared of celebrating violence, especially when they deal with the boys in these homes. The people who run these boys' homes say that most of us are here because of some sort of violent behavior. But once we are here, rather than seriously getting into the issue, violence is treated as a taboo subject. So, yeah, pages 13 to 14, he mentions all of these inventions by the Greek and Roman cultures. What's interesting is that, yes, those cultures thrived because they had a strong military force, and so they couldn't be overthrown, and they could conquer many other places and get slaves from other places. But what's interesting is all of this has to do with our culture. And it's almost like Hamish is saying that Western culture is built on violence. And I'm interested to know if you guys agree with that or not. Okay. I have been recording for quite a while now. Let's see. Yeah, almost half an hour. So I am going to do chapter 1 in 2 parts, and I'm going to leave this recording here. And so I will carry on with chapter 1 a bit later. But it would be good for me to know if this has been helpful to you or not. So also please just message me and let me know if this has helped you.